Hi everyone, my name is Dominic Arojado. I'm a web developer, and these are your guides, tips, and tricks to web development. So in this video is a part 2 of the part 1 where we created a pagination component in React and TypeScript. Now it's time to write some tests for it using JS and testing library. So just a recap, let me show you what we have built from part 1. This is the pagination component in React and TypeScript. So this basically displays a series of page numbers within a maximum length. Right now is 7. And if you go through the pages, the ellipsis moves. And yeah, basically add in the ellipsis where we can't possibly display all the numbers. So that's how it is. And once you reach a certain number, it will also move the ellipsis again where it is most appropriate. So now it's time to write some tests for it. So going back to the code, I basically push all the changes now in my commit. And yeah, so to first start with, I think the easiest way to write tests is the function itself. The function where, we basically generate an array of numbers. So the convention here when writing tests is basically, at least for me, I like to put it in the test folder. So this should be the way you write the name for it should be like this. And then that's where you put the test. So we're going to write test for this pagination. So the file name should be the same as well, but add the test affix in the middle and the file type, so .ts. So make sure that it's the same. This is the convention. And we want to import the function. So getPaginationItems. And to start with writing test, right, you want to describe what you're testing. And to describe that, you're going to use the describe block, which is already provided by JS. So when you use create React app, they already make the describe function available for you to use. You don't have to import it anywhere. Here we just want to describe what we're testing. So this function is actually part of the pagination. So we call this the pagination utilities. And then we're gonna test this function right here. So get pagination items function. And now we are describing that we're gonna test this. So how we write tests is basically using the it function. It's also one of the global functions already available for you to use. You don't have to import it anywhere. And yeah, you have to describe what this test case is about. So using it, you basically add the test case to the test file. So it should handle ellipsis in the middle. So remember our ellipsis in the middle, if our arguments is 157 or 577, where current page, last page, and the max length. So instead of generating random numbers, I think that's more complicated. We can just use statics here. Although in my previous videos, I usually use Faker. Faker is a random generator for data, best used for, prototyping and testing. But in this case, I feel that, using static, it makes it easier to understand what the test is all about. If we have to generate numbers here, now we have to also create a function that will generate the expected result array. I think that's more complicated. So in this case, let's just use this. So we're using get pagination items. And what we expect, so expect is another global function, which you pass in an argument, and then it will provide you an available other functions, which we call matchers. So we expect rest to be what? To be the element or the array here. So it's like equal. But now, because it's object, you can't basically use equal here, because even though you do this is gonna return you false. It's not exactly the same. You need to do a proper equality. So in this case, you can use 2 equal. 2 equal here, basically, rather than checking the object identity, you will check all the fields in the array and make sure that they're equal. All right, so now how do you run this test? Maybe let's stop this. And we can run one of the scripts available, so the test. And I like to also run it with a coverage so that we know how many or what are the lines that we haven't covered yet. So let's run this. And this should pass because we have already tested this when we were building. But yeah, it's good to add tests in your code so that whenever you make changes, you can just run the test to make sure that nothing has been breaking. All right, so it passed. Now we can see that our test case is running with a check mark, green, pass. And yeah, we have a coverage here. So we haven't covered lines 16 and 86. So 16 is starting from handling all the logics until there. So now let's move on. So we can add more tests here. We can basically do this and then pass in the second example. Remember, we have two examples here. You can use this and compare it that it should, return until 1 to 7. So run this. So good thing about running yarn tests in your local, it will automatically run the tests once you save the file. So another time saver for us, we don't have to keep executing the test script. It will automatically run. So yeah, it still passes. That means that yeah, we're good with this. Now let's try the test for the remaining. So you already know what to do. You basically just have to copy this with all of your examples and just compare them. I'm not going to type in here to make this video faster. I'm just going to copy paste it. So basically, this is exactly the same as what we use here. So 5, 6, 3, 4, 7, 8. 5, 6, 3, 4, 7, 8. It should handle ellipses, 2 ellipses. Oh, okay, I think this is not okay. This should handle last page less than or equal to next line. Apologies for that. So yeah, this is the one with the middle. This is less than the max length, not ellipses in the middle. Sorry about that. So yeah, this is exactly the same examples we use here. We can now delete this. And yeah, once we run the test, we see the coverage, boom. We achieve 100% test coverage because these are all the scenarios we've been handling. So with just this, we are now done writing tests for pagination. All right. So we can save this in our git commit. And this. And test for pagination function. Okay. So now let's proceed to writing tests for the PageLink component. Again, same thing. You want to separate all the test files in a folder so that it's not cluttering the main files. So you only want to see the test once you open this folder. Again, same thing. Should have the same name with the .test affix. Import PageLink. Then write a describe block. It's basically testing the PageLink component. All right. So what do we want to do? Basically, we want to test whether it renders the anchor element by default. So by default, we expect the anchor element to be rendered, right? If it's disabled, then it's span. But by default, it should render. If we didn't pass the disabled true as the props, then we shouldn't render span. So it should render anchor element by default, right? So if you're new to Jest, you can actually use test. It's the same as it. It's an alias. But yeah, I like to use it because when you read it, it should render. Yeah. So I like to read it that way. And yeah, at this point we need a children. So in this we can either hard code it, but in this case I want to use the faker which I mentioned earlier. I'm gonna install it now. Faker.js. Faker.js, I think at faker.js/faker. So it's just gonna show you what Faker is about. So yeah, Faker helps us to generate massive amounts of fake data. This is a library that we can use to generate data for us when testing or developing. So this is what I'm going to use. If you go to their guides, you can see a lot of APIs you can use to generate random animal, random commerce data like color, company, random company name. They also have lorem ipsum, so which one we're going to use to generate a random text for us. So yeah, let's use Faker now. I want to generate a random text using lorem sentence. So this will generate a sentence. You can hover onto it to see what are the examples as well. And then you can render the component in a test environment using the render from the testing library. And then you can pass in the PageLink component. And then you wrap it so that the text becomes the children of it. Now what can we do to assert this test case? We can use the screen, which is available from the testing library as well, to query for the element via the text. So there's a lot of things you can use. You can query by alternative text, display value, label text, placeholder, role, simply text as well, or title. I'm just going to use text. So using the text that we have generated above, we can get the element. Once we get the element can be an HTML or null. So we have to use an ternary here to get the tag name. And we expect it to be, so the tag name should be A, because that's that's the tag name for the anchor element. So just capital A. Again, let's run this test with coverage to see how our test is looking. All right, so it passed as expected. And yeah, we have basically covered lines 75%, and the covered line here is 17, which is, the disabled one. So in this same test case, we can improve this because an anchor element should have an href, right? Usually, we can do a random URL here using Faker Internet URL. If you hover onto it, this will be the example URL. Now let's pass this as a prop. And we expect, now that it is passed as a prop, we expect the element to have an attribute. So there's an available matcher to have attribute, which has been available by Create React App. They have been using testing library React DOM to include this. We have an attribute of, href with the href value. So this should pass as well. And yeah, we're going to, it passes as well. And we're going to write a couple of these test cases, and each time you write a new test case, it cleans up the DOM in the test environment. So that means that this render would be gone. And that's totally fine because each time when we write different test case, the props would be different. So we want to clean up the DOM before we do the assertions. So what we can do, I don't want to keep repeating this because in the future, if we change the name, we have to keep changing it in different lines. I just want to change it in a single line. So I'm going to create a function, reusable one, to render the component. I'm going to copy this. And it should accept props, right? So props As you remembered, we have exported it from the PageLink. Nope, I didn't. Now we should export the type. Now we can import it here in the test file. So now we can do is just get extract or destructure the props by separating children and props. And then we can pass in children here, and then we can just spread the props here. Now I can use the render component to basically have the children as the text and the href as the props. Now this, when I say save this should still pass. Let's remove that extra line. Yep, it still passes. So now we can proceed to the next test case. So the next test case is basically, it should accept, a class name props. It should accept class name props. So we can generate a random class name here. We still need to generate a text for the children. For the class name, we can use Faker word that noun. You see the example, this looks like a class name, right? External front care, yeah. Render the component, copy this. And we can use, again, element to have. So instead of attribute, we can have to have class and just pass the class name. Oh, we forgot to query for the element. Okay, so now once we save the changes, we can see that the should accept class name props test case is passing as well. Great. Okay, I think it's now time to handle the active class. So when you pass active as true, we should have a class name of active. And we should have the area current attribute as page as well. So let's write that. I'm just going to copy this, should accept active props. Just generate text here. Instead of passing class name, we want to pass active as true. And it should have an active class. And to have an attribute of area current as page. Let's test this out. Okay, so it passes. So since we're checking the area current, right, as the value, maybe we can add a counter check. If we didn't pass active as true, we should not have the area current in the element. So we can add it in the first test case where we render the anchor element by default, just as a counter check, And yeah, it still passes. For the last test case, we've been seeing the uncovered line for a while now. I think it's time to address that. It should accept disabled props. Okay, maybe I just copy this. Change this to disabled. So what do we expect when it's disabled? So instead of an anchor element, it should be span element. And yeah, I think that's it basically. Oh no, we should have a disabled class name as well. So to have class disabled, and we wanna check the element tag name to be span. All right, so this should pass as expected. Great, now we achieve 100% test coverage for PageLink component. All right, it's now time to proceed to writing tests. For the last component, we need to write test for, which is the pagination component. I'm going to create a file, pagination test.tsx. Let me just push the changes for the PageLink first. I'm pushing the changes so that, when you run yarn test, right, it refers to the .git folder, which is the git changes. So when you write tests, when you run the yarn test coverage, it will only run what the tests that you made changes to. So it won't run PageLink test anymore because you have already tested it. When you make changes to pagination, then it will just run pagination. That's why we need to commit PageLink, PageLink. Yes. What changes we will do here? Already exported it. Okay, so add test for PageLink component. Okay, this where we install paper. All right, so now we're left with the pagination component. We need to run the test coverage again. So currently it will fail because we don't have any tests yet. Must at least have one test. Let's first import pagination. Pagination component. Okay, and using the same thing that we did here, we wanna write the description for what we're testing, and use this render function. So remember we created a reusable component so that we don't have to keep writing this block. In case we need to change the name, we just have to change in this place. We need to import the props as well from pagination. So in pagination, it doesn't have children. So we can just remove the children and just pass in the props. Okay, so what do we need to test? So first, let's test that it should render the nav element. So remember, it's a nav element, and there's a label here. We can use the label to query for that element. So if you remember, should render nav element. So let's first render the component. And in this case, it requires a couple of props, right? See that you will require current page, last page, max length, and set current page. Yeah. So I'm just going to use same thing that we did in the pagination function. I'm going to use static value so that it's easier to understand. So I'm just going to use 157.157. Here we need to pass a function. And we can either pass just an anonymous function, but in Jest we have this thing called the mock function. So this is what a mock function looks like. It's basically like a anonymous function, but you can spy on it or like reset its details later. Later I'll be showing you how it's going to be used. But for now, we're not going to do anything with it yet. We just need the component to be rendered. So after it is rendered, let's query for the element. So nav element screen from testing library, query by label. So remember we have a area label here. You just have to look for pagination. You expect the nav element to have the tag name of nav, right? And that's it. This should pass, and yeah, it did. Now we just have to write a couple more test cases so that we achieve 100% test coverage. So what do we do now? I think what we can do here is also check how many numbers in the first test case, how many elements in the nav element it contains. So, you know, when we use this example right here, right, from the pagination, we expect it to be displaying 1 to 5, and also the previous and the next button. So the nav element count, the child count inside the nav element should be, child element count should be, 5 plus 2 because of the previous and next button. So maybe let's extract last page here, last page, and then we can use last page plus 2. Let's see if this passes as well. And yeah, it passes. And we can do further checks here to basically check if the nav element, that child nodes, so we can access the child nodes here. And using the index, so this is the first element, we can check that what is the text content. So this should be previous button, right? Because when we display the pagination, it will be previous. Let me just draw. It will be previous, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then next, right? It will be something like this. And the first element in the child nodes of the nav element, it will be previous. So we can do further one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And just 5 up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the next element here. 4, 5, 6. So this should pass as well. Let's check. And yeah, it does. It still passes, and this is what we currently expect. We can expect that the nav element should contain at least 6 child nodes, and then each of those 6 we check the text content if it's displaying the correct pagination. And we can further, refactor this so we can reduce the code duplication. We can basically extract the child nodes. So instead of adding them directly here, we can create an array of how we expect it to be, something like this, converted into an array, and we can check that the child element count should be equal to the length of this array here. Then we can do a loop. So let's loop child text component, and we can also get the index when we do the for each loop. Just copy this. So using the index, get the child nodes of the nav element, and then compare it with the expected text content. Right? So we're basically looping this. Check previous is in the index 0, 1, 2, 3, and so forth and so forth. This should still pass. Yep, and it does. Now we don't need last page to be extracted from the props. We can just directly do this. And now this is our first test case. Great. So let's see if we can cover line 26. Why is line 26? Oh, this is the on-click. So let's worry about that later. Maybe let's just handle line 38 where we display ellipses. How do we display ellipses? Is where, it's more than the max length. So let's do that. It should render ellipses. All right, so maybe I'm gonna copy what we did here. But instead of 5, I'm going to use 10. Third page is 5. All right. And in this case, our expected child context, if you remember from pagination, 5 and 10, we want to get this. Oops, sorry about that. We want to get this. So 1, ellipsis, ellipsis, 4, 5, 6, then ellipsis, then 10. So 1, ellipsis, ellipsis, 4, 5, 6. So 5 is in the middle, the current page. Then ellipsis, then next. All right, so we can just copy this as well. And see if this passes. Okay, this is failing. 1. Oh, we forgot to pass in the last page, which is 10. So this should pass. Now it should pass. All right, and it does, and this is basically our second test case. We're done with this. Now we can basically look on these uncovered lines. These are basically all the on-click. So 26, line 26 here is an on-click. Line 36 is also an on-click. 44 is also an on-click. So let's handle those. So it should handle PageLink component on click. PageLink on click. Okay, first let's just render the elements. Okay, so now what do we do? So what we want to do next is basically fire an event. And how do we fire an event in a test environment? You can use fire event, which is available from the testing library as well. Fire event, and that will give you an object of events that you can call. So one is click. You can even do a mouse enter, key up, key down. You can use those, but we're just going to use on click, and we need to pass in an element. So maybe let's do the previous element. Let's first query for it using query text, screen query by text, and using the previous text here, pass that element here. And yeah, we'll get a TypeScript error because this will return an HTML element or null. And fire event doesn't accept null. So we need to do an assertion here. This is what we call a TypeScript assertion. Is when we know more than TypeScript. We know that this will be an element. It will never be null. At least that's what we expect it to be. So in this case, we want to just basically assert that this should be an element. Now the TypeScript error is gone. So be careful when using type assertion is only when you know more about TypeScript. But in most cases, if you don't know, then let TypeScript handle it. It could be an HTML element or it could be null. All right, but in this case, we know that previous element is always there, and so that we can do the assertion on the function. So now what do we do? What do we check? We want to check whether the setCurrentPage was called. So this is where the mock function comes in. Maybe let's extract it as a variable. We call it setCurrentPage mock. So if we click previous element, we want this to check if this was, called. So we can expect setCurrentPage mock to be called. And how many times? We can even check how many times. You just want to check it was called one time. And we can also check what was the argument passed in that function. So to be called with, so what argument? So if we click previous, if the current page is 5, we want it to change to 4 because we want to go backwards or the previous page. Maybe we can extract this as well. Current page 5. So call bit current page -1. That's the exact logic we added here, current page -1 for the previous. So let's check whether this is passing. And yep, it does. So just a counter check. We want to add in a expectation before we click that the mock function was not called, not to be called. Okay, so this is how you do a not to be called. So yeah, it still passes. Okay, next thing we want to do is basically click on the next element. Let's just copy this. This will be the next element. And instead of -1, it will be +1, right? And it should pass as well. Oops, it didn't. Now, because when you call this the second time, now the number of times that current page was called is now 2. What you can do is basically, you can either change this to 2, but I think better way is resetting the setCurrentPage mock. Just now I mentioned you can reset the details of the function. You can do it by you calling the mock here. So now it will go back to its original state where it wasn't called before. And then if we run this function or this test again, it should pass. And yes, it does. Now we're left with the line number 36, which is one of the page numbers. Maybe I'll just select number 4. So the num text here is 4, right? And we want to get the element by querying the text 4. Text. Again, we are for certain that this is part of the elements. So we do an assertion here. Copy this, replace it with number element, and don't forget to do a mock clear. and it should call the number text. So since this is a string, it should be converted to a number. So let's just wrap it with the number element. And now once we save, and it will automatically run this test script. Boom, 100% test coverage. So that's really great. We're actually done writing tests now. So just to maybe, prevent this, we wanna refactor this, right, to reduce the duplications. So this is what we're gonna do. Basically create an array. I'm gonna create an array maybe here. So these are all the array elements that we wanna click, previous, next, and number 4. And then we wanna have another key in the object, page num. What number do we expect the set current page mark to be returning? So in previous, we wanna deduct the current page with -1, and then current page +1 for next, and 4 is just 4 as well. Now we can loop this. So below the not to be code, you can do a for each button item, or you can maybe extract it or do an restructuring. So using the text here, and use text. Now this is the bottom element. We want to fire an event and then do the assertion. So it should be called once, and then the expected page number to be called. And every time this for each loops, we need to clear the current page mark. Maybe we can even call it here as well before the click. Actually, that's not necessary. And I think, yeah, we can just delete this. Now we have a shorter code and less duplication. Once we save this should still pass. And yes, indeed. Now we're done writing tests for it. So I hope you really learned a lot from this video. There's more videos to come related to creating your own components in React and TypeScript, and also learn how to write tests for it using JS and testing library. So yeah, I hope if you learn a lot from this video and you like it, please like and share it with your friends, colleagues, or networks that you think might be helpful to them as well. So thank you so much for watching, and see you again in the next video. Bye.